All right, well, thank y'all all for coming. This is a talk that in some ways didn't want to prepare. I learned about the gentleman I'm going to speak about tonight about a year ago. There was a little newspaper clipping that mentioned him, and he said that he was a veteran of 3 wars, and he was about to march off into his 4th war, which would have been the Civil War. But what caught my attention was that he told that he was a member of the 6th Tennessee Regiment, which was a Southern regiment, a Confederate regiment. And it said that he was fully dressed in the gray, and that it told how he was a avid supporter of the South. Well, that immediately got my attention because that wasn't something I ever expected to read about a man of color. It just didn't seem to fit. So I began to do some research, and I know John's done some. We don't have a photo of Colonel Matt Dyer, and so I found this one, which is an old family photo. It was taken at H.A. Collinsworth's sawmill, and it looks like a group of young people that were having a picnic, and the black man that's there seems to have a cake that he's about to serve in front of them. And so I guess they were having a big time at the sawmill. I never saw anyone have a good time at a sawmill. So that's kind of an interesting photo. I wish we had a little more info. In order to talk about Colonel Dyer, we're going to have to talk about a couple of men that you would have heard about. But his name alone and him going to 3 other wars made me realize that he may have served in one of the wars that my 4th great-grandfather served in, which was the Creek War and the Battle of New Orleans. So we looked into it, and sure enough, he was an enslaved man who had served with Colonel Robert Dyer. So if you're familiar with Colonel Robert Dyer, he had gone to war with him at least twice. At the time the article that I read was printed, he was enslaved to Judge Milton Brown. Judge Milton Brown had come from Ohio to Middle Tennessee and began to study law in 1823. Who was that with? Felix Grundy. With Felix Grundy. My 3rd great-grandfather had an older brother that was studying law and had just been admitted to the bar that same year in Nashville. So a little bit of tie to, they may have known each other, because I'm sure they saw each other in the courtrooms there in Nashville. But Milton Brown, he's got a long list of accomplishments. I would just mention a couple of those. He was a member of the Tennessee Supreme Court, the U.S. Senate, and those things that he had been appointed to didn't interest him a lot. He was more interested in commerce. He was interested in rail companies, and so he got involved with the rail companies. And you'll see here that he became president of 2 rail lines, the Mississippi Central in Tennessee and the Mobile in Ohio. That's quite a lot to take on a role of 2 railroads. He also was among Tennessee's most charitable Methodist lay leaders and helped in the founding of 3 colleges, Union, Lambeth, and Vanderbilt University. So very, not just influential man, but a very benevolent man, very interested in improving the education of the people of Tennessee. So the Mobile in Ohio was completed just about 2 years before Abraham Lincoln was elected. And as a little side note, if you go to the Casey Jones Village, the Pullman rail car that's out in the middle of the parking area, was named for Judge Milton Brown, so that's kind of a neat little.
I knew I read that name somewhere, and that's where it was.
Yeah. But he was a very influential man, and that same great uncle of mine that went to Texas and helped fight for their independence, and Sam Houston, who were all young attorneys in Nashville in the 1820s. They must have known each other, but while Milton Brown was a representative, he is the man that actually introduced the bill that allowed for Texas to become a state. So that was in 1845. That's a huge accomplishment, just that one thing. So we see a whole lot about him. But he had what I call a right-hand man in Matt Dyer.
Mm-hmm.
Matt Dyer as you're going to see, was a very unusual person, especially for his stature in life. Being an enslaved man, you would think they might not be known very well or have that many things that have been accomplished, but you'll see. That's a picture of Milton Brown's grave in Riverside Cemetery in Jackson. He was noted to be possibly the wealthiest man in West Tennessee in his heyday. And his son, Milton Brown Jr., became a sergeant major in the 6th Tennessee Regiment. As it turns out, I'm almost certain that his son was over all of the cooks within the entire regiment. But as you'll see, Colonel Matt Dyer was the head of the cooks on a first-hand basis, like day to day. Camp Brown, that was in Union City. That was a Confederate training camp. John and I are pretty certain it was named for Judge Brown. It stands to reason if he was president of the Mobile, Ohio, and it traveled through Union City, that name might apply to him. So that was a letterhead from him. Brown had an opponent in Jackson, Tennessee, that Mr. Ricky Long told us about. As a matter of fact, they were arch enemies in Dr. William Edward Butler, who was a very prominent man there in Jackson and the founder of the city. That's a picture of his headstone. Dr. Butler didn't even want a headstone. He didn't think that was appropriate to have a headstone at your grave. But later, years later, he did receive one. One of his, this is probably a granddaughter of his that applied for a headstone for him, a military marker. And here is a picture, if it'll advance. There it is, of his bronze marker, noting that he was a surgeon in the 2nd Tennessee Infantry, which was actually the Battle of New Orleans, where he served during the War of 1812. And the other interesting thing about Dr. Butler is that he was raised by General Andrew Jackson after his father died when he was young.
He was a young surgeon.
Yeah.
He was 22 years old.
Yeah, and I don't know what kind of training he had or anything about that, but anyway, when the war between the states began, he was the same age that I am now. The other thing that Ricky Long told us about the last meeting we had was that he equipped and maintained a company, the 6th Tennessee Regiment, by himself. In other words, he provided all the funds for that regiment throughout the whole Civil War. That took a lot of money to do that. But he did have a grandson that served, and so he was very interested in supporting the cause. I'm going to shift gears now. We're not going to talk about the white affluent people any longer. We're going to begin talking about the subject that we're here for today. And you see, well, that name, Martha Bragg, has really nothing to do with this except that she was a free girl of color who had been employed to be a laundress for Surgeon Hamilton at Strawberry Plains, Tennessee. So we see in a supportive role, this young lady was helping in the hospital environment in eastern Tennessee during the war. This is an actual Confederate service record. But getting on to old Matt, I think this might have been the exact article I first saw. It says, "Gone to the wars, old Matt has gone to the wars. Does anyone ask who old Matt is?" Well, we probably wouldn't, except for the other things that we begin to learn about him. So he was a Negro, a property of Honorable Milton Brown, so we know he was enslaved. And it goes on to tell about he had a better knowledge of white man and of matters in the South than 1 in 10 of the miserable fanatics he has gone to assist in chastising. We met Matt on the streets in full uniform a day or two before his departure. So this would have been about May 23rd, 1861 in Jackson, near the fairgrounds, which was called Camp Fair. And his answer when he was asked about this, he was asked if he was going to war. And as nearly as we can remember, the writer of the article says, his reply was, "Yes, master, I am. I put through the Battle of New Orleans, the Florida War," which was the Seminole War, "and the Mexican War. Then I took up the Mobile and Ohio Railroad and put that through like a flash." So he evidently oversaw much of the building of the railroad for Judge Milton Brown. He said, "I am now going to whip out those infernal black Republicans, put the country to peace, and then retire and live like a gentleman the balance of my days." And they were convinced that Matt would do it. So quite a statement from a man like that, and it just captivated me to hear this. Okay. A man from Humboldt several years ago told me about the day that the 6th Tennessee marched from Camp Fair, where they were mustered into Confederate service, to the depot so that they could be transported to Camp Brown. He said underneath King Tire, down in the creek, there's a portion of the old cobblestone street. Can you see that photo okay? So I couldn't help myself. I climbed off down in there one Sunday afternoon, took my camera and found a portion of it, and the water was running clear over it, and those bricks, although they were worn and rounded, they looked just as pretty as they could be. So I knew that what he had told me was correct. Okay. This account of Colonel Matt Dyer was from Robert Gates, who was also a member of the 6th Tennessee. So this is not secondhand information, and it's not third-party information. This is from someone who probably saw and heard many of the things that we read about. He said that Matt was cooking for the officers' mess of Company H. That's the same company that Dr. Butler equipped and funded throughout the war. So that matches. And he says that Matt was in the War of 1812, so that matches what Matt had said when the reporter wrote about him before, with the famous Colonel Dyer, who was Colonel Robert Dyer. And this fact made him an authority, not only with the Negroes, but with the interesting character, and an interesting character with the soldiers. He was also a boss cook. It's told that, I think the number might have been as many as 60 other cooks that Matt was in charge of. So he would give them their daily instructions of what they were to cook that day and what the men were to have for their meals. Now, most of that time was at Camp Brown. That wasn't after Shiloh, because the Army was on the move then. So as it explains, the cooks being available to the men was not after that point. In other words, just probably when they were at Camp Brown. So, peace to his ashes. Now, this was something that came up that really interesting. After the war, this ad was evidently put in the paper by Matt Dyer, and he says, at the request of my old friends, I've concluded to open an intelligence office in the city of Jackson. Persons of color wishing situations and those wishing to hire either field hands or house servants would find it in their interest to make application to me. For the blacks, I will find good homes, and my old friends shall get good servants. I can be found at the store of F.W. Yancey. That was Frederick W. Yancey. So, what an interesting thing for a man who's now free to begin an enterprise, to be an entrepreneur, to want to be available to help his people. And that help would also be a people to his friends that he had known that were white. So, really interesting. This little note explains a little bit about the Yancey house. It was at number 3 Market Street in Jackson. It had been burned down a couple of times or burned out, but they were now back in business as a wholesale and retail merchant. They were also offering meals for all hours, served up the best style by that Prince of Cooks, Colonel Robert Dyer. So he must have been one fine cook, because he was well known throughout the city and the whole, probably, county. But, you know, it also says there would be something to revive the spirits of the despondent and make them lively as crickets. Well, we can only imagine what those spirits might have been. But they wouldn't do that on the Sabbath. So we go back to some of the old ways.
Tells you what that was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this guy, he has to be mentioned because of what you're going to see after this slide. This was Parson Brownlow. He was the first governor during Reconstruction. As you know, the state of Tennessee and all the South underwent 12 years of Reconstruction, during which time almost every official was elected without the help of any Southern sympathizers, because they were not allowed to vote if they had supported the Southern cause in any way. But he became a very hated man by many of the people of Tennessee, and maybe rightfully so. This is an agreement or a contract between Colonel Matt Dyer and Frederick W. Yancey. It basically says that Mr. Yancey will pay Matt Dyer $40 a month until he adds an addition on the back of the house. And at that time, he will pay him $35 a month, provide him a place to live, and provide him provisions or enough food to sustain him and his wife. So that's one of the Freedmen Bureau contracts that you may have heard about. So he's doing a good job of starting a new life as a free man.
And an older man by this time.
Yeah, he was. He'd be an older man by this time. Now, this slide was there were a number of articles like this that appeared in newspapers all throughout Tennessee and actually all across the United States, even as far away as New Zealand. And you'll see why. This is from the Tennessee Whig in Jackson on the 16th in 1867, 16th of February. And it says, "It will be seen from the following letter that a colored citizen of the city, well and favorably known as Colonel Matt Dyer, has conditionally announced himself as a candidate for governor." Wow. For governor? What's going on? "As we have no vote, we can only look on and see the fight between the Negroes and the radicals. In justice, however, to our fellow citizen, Colonel Dyer, we may say that he has lived in Tennessee for over 40 years, and from his well-established character for honesty, be it an early day gained the confidence of his master, which secured him opportunities for self-improvement, but few others of his color had. He has been often sent off on important missions and trusted with the safekeeping of large sums of money." So that's a lot of trust. "As a politician, he is well posted. As a speaker, he is highly entertaining. He can hold a crowd for hours in the most rapturous applause. He is widely known and very popular. If we were betting men, we would stake our pile on the Colonel as against Brownlow. He is a progressive man and will debate the issues of the day with all the ability of an earnest nature. He should really pity our old friend, or we should really pity our old friend Brownlow. If Colonel Dyer gets him on the stump, he will knock the yellow jaundice out of him in less than no time." So, this guy's, he's a character, isn't he? And really, I think it's one that a lot of people would love to watch and listen to him speak. He goes on and addresses a letter to the governor. And this, let me, is this a back and forward? Okay. I think, yeah, okay. This is the article that appeared in New Zealand. Jackson, Tennessee, February 12th, 1867. "To Governor Brownlow, Sir, I learned that you in the lower house of your legislature have passed a law to allow the colored people of the state to vote. So far, so good. But, sir, you have at the same time provided in the law that they shall not hold office. Now, what does such legislation mean? I am a colored man, and I have wool on my head, but you and your white trash can't pull that wool over my eyes. The darkies in Tennessee generally will understand what you are after and will put their broad feet down upon you. I learned further that the bill has been sent to the Senate, where it is to be hoped the restrictions against my people will be wiped out. In that event, at the warm solicitation of my friends, I hereby announce myself candidate for governor. I expect you to be my competitor, and I propose to open the canvass at an early day, and I will join you in a plan of appointments from Carter to Shelby counties. I propose to conduct the canvass like a statesman, but notify you in advance that I will hold you personally responsible for any insults you may offer. I shall take along your debate with my friend, Mr. Pearn, and shall prove by that you have been a greater persecutor of my race in Tennessee than any other man. Now, keep in mind, Governor Brownlow was a Union man. He was not a Southern sympathizer. And what is Matt Dyer saying about him? That he was the greatest of all their persecutors of his race? Man, that's crazy. And he says, I charge that your present course is one purely of selfishness. It will not be amiss to say here that I am in favor of equal justice to all the people of the state, that I am in favor of relieving relieving the colored people of the state from paying taxes for 3 years, and in favor of their having all the vacant lands in the state by paying surveyors' fees, that I am a friend of all religious denominations, that I am friendly to all the secret orders of the state, but only belong to the Order of the Lone Star. I've never heard of that one, so I had to look it up. I'll show you next what I found, which isn't a lot. I have held the Constitution of that order in my hands and sworn support to it. But more of my principles hereafter. When I get you on the stump, you will learn who and what I am. Respectfully, your fellow equal, etc. Matt Dyer. Now, you never expected to hear this today because it's so unique. The Order of the Lone Star was a secret society, began in New York City. The exact date of the formation isn't known with certainty. Its reason for being was the conquest of territory owned by Spain in the New World for the expansion of the United States. It has been suggested that the New York-based society possibly was inspired by the creation of the first Lone Star Republic, the Republic of West Florida, in 1810, which I was not aware of because I thought it was Texas. But if anyone learns more about the Order of the Lone Star, I wished you would share it because I just learned about it really this morning. Interesting thing. Okay. This was the letter in Bristol, Tennessee. It's similar to the other, so I won't go over that. But, and actually, I think this is the one that was in New Zealand. And they have different ways of expressing things, and I don't know exactly what all of them mean. I think I've heard these terms before from people from Australia, maybe. They said that Parson Brownlow, the governor of Tennessee, has a foeman worthy of his steel in the person of one Matt Dyer, a regular Ebon Shin and Gizzardfoot. Those aren't terms that we use here in the States, but I think I've heard those from Aussies at different times in movies or whatever, maybe. But anyway, once again, he charged Brownlow with selfishness, prepared to show that Parson had been a persecutor of blacks in Tennessee. And he closes his letter once again, when I get you on the stump, you will hear who I am and what I am. Amazing. Okay, that's all that I actually have on Colonel Matt Dyer. This was an African-American journalist from Charleston, South Carolina, Earl Douglas. You can read that if you want. But I think the main thing that I want you to see here is the middle paragraph. This gentleman was convinced after many, many years of studying the war between the states that the narrative, even in 1979 when this was published, was not altogether correct. We have to accept the fact that the news media is not always accurate, not on purpose always, but just sometimes they just don't happen to get it right. But we're hoping that we'll get it right today. But he said if hate had been the prevailing emotion between the races, then it is a safe bet that the Confederacy would have never been born. Fortunately, there was love, understanding, and compassion, and the two greatest lies ever perpetrated by history are that the South instigated the war and that it was fought by the North for the purpose of freeing slaves. The Negro was merely used as the excuse for that war, while the real reason for it is reflected in every area of our lives where the tentacles of government form a new bars of slavery. So, since that statement came from a black journalist, I have to ponder on it. I have to wonder why he made that statement. I have a personal story, a true story within my family of a former enslaved girl that came and lived in my great-great-grandparents' home and raised one of their young sons. She came and served as a wet nurse, and those children loved her. I mean, this was following the war, but I have a personal story. My dad shared with me that my great-grandmother, who was a little child when that lady was in their home, defended her friendship with her for all of her life. And when Sarah Brewer, that black lady, would friend of hers, a very close friend, would come and visit their home, that many of the people in the community around about would criticize, complain, and condemn her being in the area, much less in her home. And she defended that friendship till the day she died, which I attended her 100th birthday, so I know what kind of lady she was. That to me lends a lot of credibility to that statement, if hate had been the prevailing emotion between the races. I don't believe that it always was, not in every case. I'm sure there were instances, but not every time. What we have today to remember Colonel Matt Dyer are only his stories. And if y'all notice in the corner of this old photograph or sketch, whichever it may be, is the monument that was placed on the courthouse grounds in Jackson, that's still there today. It was placed by the United Daughters of the Confederacy in memory of those who never came home. And that's the only thing that we have for Matt as a grave marker, is that monument. Thank you very much.
Pretty good.
Very good.
Y'all got any questions for